Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm here with my first review from this year's International Booker Longlist, and that first book is Not a River by Selva Almada, and this is translated from the Spanish by Annie McDermott. And this, I did not realize going in, is part of a loose trilogy, one of those books being Brickmakers, which came out a few years ago. Well, it was translated a few years ago into English, and I've heard a lot of good things about it, and spoiler alert, I really enjoyed this book, so I am going to likely go back and read some of her backlist, including the two books that followed this in this loose trilogy. Now, this book follows our three primary characters. We have Eñero, we have El Negro, and we have Tito. Now, Tito is the son of a friend of Eñero and El Negro, and his name was Eusebio, and Eusebio had passed in an accident years before, but because the group of three friends enjoyed fishing, that was part of what they liked to do, they have kept the tradition alive with Tito as a replacement for Eusebio since he is no longer with us. And the story basically starts with them on this fishing trip, and they're bringing in this big fish, and once they catch the fish, they kind of go to camp, and later on in the camp, they are approached by this other group of men, and it's kind of an odd meeting. It's kind of an odd interaction, but it does build some tension, and it just gives the reader that initial sense of unease, like something bad is going to come about from this. And one of the things I loved about this book, because there's really not a whole lot of things going on with it as far as plot. Not to say that it's plotless, there is plot, but this is one of those books that to me is more about the tone and the mood and the feelings that the reader is having throughout the duration of the story. And this is one of those books that after that initial interaction between the two groups of men, that tension is there, and that tension, like a river, is there as like an undercurrent throughout the duration of the story. And I absolutely loved that sense of dread, being on guard as a reader, waiting for every page to see, is this gonna be where the proverbial shit hits the fan and something bad and dark and looming happens. And that is a genius part of Almada's writing, is her way of getting the reader's attention and keeping it throughout, and you kind of emotionally investing yourself in these characters and waiting to see what eventually happens to them. Now, I loved Almada's writing. Her writing is compelling, it's well developed, and it's very purposeful. There is not a single word in this book that is wasted. It is a very tight story. It's only, I think, just over, actually, it's not even 100 pages. It comes in at 93 pages. So there's a lot packed into this very short novella. And as I mentioned, not a whole lot happens in this book, but for me, it was definitely more about the mood than the story for me. What I loved about this book too was the diving between the past and the present. So we have Eñero and we have El Negro, who were friends with Eusebio in the past. So we dip back into the past and we learn more about those characters when they were younger, leading up to the accident that killed Eusebio, and then of course we spent a lot of time in the present. There are also other side characters as well that we meet along the way, and we also do the same for them. Although they're not primary characters, we still go on that journey between past and present with them, and we do also learn a little more about the men that show up at the beginning of the story that kind of have that interaction with the three men that kind of sets all of that tension into play. So there is a lot of back and forth, and as a matter of fact, as I was reading it, I realized that Almada does it so well that there were times where she really did just like flow between those different timelines, and it was seamless, but it wasn't so jarring to the reader that you got to the point where you never understood whether you were in the past or the present. You always knew where you stood and where you were, but you didn't even realize that Almada got you there. She was just so good at doing that. This book made me feel super uneasy. I was on edge the whole time, and like I said, I just felt like there was always something big about to happen. And I love books that can just grab me and capture my attention, and even if nothing ends up happening in the end, or we never really get that big thing, I still loved having that feeling, and when I get to the end of books like that, I'm satisfied regardless, because it wasn't like I had no feelings and then all of a sudden at the end the book reveals something and then all of my emotions are packed into one side of the book. With a book like this, my emotions are evenly distributed from the first page to the very end, and I absolutely love when writers can do that for me. This book is also, I think, obviously, because we were dipping between the past and the present, it talks a lot about memory and it talks about grief. But one of the other things I think that this book did really well, and I think that this is kind of where that loose trilogy comes into play, because I've heard that her other books kind of have similar themes in the sense of being very masculine and highlighting some of that toxic masculinity that exists. But what I noticed in this is it was very masculine, and it painted for me kind of that stereotypical picture of how men are super territorial with not only their land, but with women and with their things as well. And how anytime an outsider or another man comes in and threatens anything with their homeostasis, they react, and oftentimes it's not in a civil way. It is often very violent, and it can be very aggressive. So I think that she did an amazing job capturing that. This is the first book that I've read, and although it wasn't a 5-star, I ended up landing on a 4, so a very solid start for me. And I love that I'm now dipping into these International Booker books. I know I've been spending so much time on nonfiction as of late with the Women's Prize for Nonfiction, so I'm so glad to kind of be back in my original love, which is fiction. And not only that, but it's translated. So I'm a very happy girl with my reading so far, and I have already read a few others from the list as well. After this, I'm just going to start to go into some of those other reviews, and I'm very happy that we're still in the midst of book prize season, and there are lots more reviews to come. So until we read again, bye!